It was never my intention to find myself in that bar. The atmosphere was not one that a woman of my disposition would typically venture into alone. Shadows danced beneath the dim lights, polished marble counters gleamed, and soft jazz whispered from unseen speakers. It served as a haven for wanderers, entrepreneurs, and those merely passing by. Perhaps that was my desire that evening, to become an unfamiliar figure in the narrative of my own existence. At the age of 43, with nearly 20 years of marriage behind me, I had perfected the skill of blending into the background. In the confines of my home, I prepared meals that were only partially savored, arranged shirts that went unseen, and chuckled at humor that had lost its charm. My husband was a good man, or so the world would have you believe. Consistent, dependable, accomplished. Yet what of love? Affection had settled into a gentle rhythm, akin to the ritual of extinguishing the lights at the end of the day. Unsurprising. Devoid of vitality. That evening, following yet another dispute over trivial matters, over everything, I stepped out of the house with my coat scarcely fastened, declaring that I simply required some fresh air. My feet carried me 2 blocks to the hotel bar I had seen countless times yet never stepped inside. The door was substantial, the sort that gave the impression of departing one realm and stepping into an entirely different one. He stood concealed behind the counter. At first glance, merely a bartender, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. He had dark hair that curled at the collar and an effortless smile that seemed genuine. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms glistening subtly with the trace of hard work. Yet it was his gaze, calm, focused, that captivated me. Not in a manner that suggested surveillance, but in a way that conveyed a sense of being acknowledged. "How may I assist you?" he inquired, his tone soft yet inviting. I nearly uttered, "Anything powerful enough to erase my existence." Instead I whispered, "Whiskey sour." Moments later the glass appeared before me, its cool condensation brushing against my fingertips. The initial taste ignited a fire, only to be calmed moments later. Unintentionally, I found myself speaking, sharing trivial observations about the weather, and noting the unusual stillness of the bar on a Tuesday evening. He paid attention, nodded thoughtfully, and inquired just enough to rekindle my sense of intrigue. As I rose to depart an hour later, he offered me a smile that felt almost too tender. "A whiskey sour, is it?" he said, as though he were committing me to memory. I hadn't given it much thought, until 3 days later when I entered once more, and before I could even take a seat, a glass was already there, waiting for me. 3 days after that initial night, I forced myself through the heavy door once more, driven more by instinct than by bravery. The bar exuded a chill that contrasted with the street outside. Amber lights casting a warm glow, low brass notes wafting from concealed speakers, and that subtle scent of citrus and oak that I had come to link with a sense of relief. His gaze met mine before I had even arrived at the counter. "Good evening," he remarked, placing a glass upon a neatly arranged square of linen, which he had smoothed with his hand. A delicate foam, the vivid brightness of lemon, adorned with 2 tiny dashes of Angostura resting atop. "You remembered," I remarked, taken aback by the gravelly quality of my voice. He inclined his head, a gesture reminiscent of a bow. "A whiskey sour. Reduce the sweetness, amplify the zest. First, dry shake the egg white." A faint smile appeared. "You showed kindness to a Tuesday." Tuesdays remain etched in my memory. I ought to have found it amusing. Instead, a sensation in my chest began to unfurl. Recalling my presence was never a challenge. It was merely a matter of attention. Yet the sheer essence of it resonated like warmth cradled in frigid palms. He placed a delicate glass of water beside the sour. "It's a house rule," he stated. "Prioritize water. I ensure my favorites remain well hydrated. Beloved selections." The word settled softly, then graciously feigned ignorance. Our conversation steered clear of husbands and homes. We discussed the sorts of insights that can flow between strangers without disrupting the atmosphere. The ideal moment to stroll by the river, before the dog crowd. The proper method to remedy a squeaky hinge, candle wax works if oil doesn't. The albums that evoke the sensation of a window ajar on a warm summer day. He posed inquiries like a skilled bartender, inviting with no obligation to enter. And when I finally did, he took his time with me. By the second week, He began to greet me with my drink partially prepared, the tin already chilled in his grasp. He held it firmly until I selected a stool. Inexplicably, my corner remained perpetually vacant, the one adorned with a brass footrest and a sightline to the entrance. "I hold it for you," he remarked, brushing away an unseen circle from the surface of the wood. "Certain seats only find comfort in anticipation. Is this level of ceremony reserved for all your regulars?" I playfully remarked. "Only those who feign ignorance," he remarked, then turned away to grab a lemon, as if his words hadn't just planted a seed of contemplation that would linger in my mind for days. By chance I discovered his name, Miles, imprinted in small letters on the edge of a black book he stored beneath the bar. It made sense considering the melody. Once I gave it a try subtly, as a gesture of gratitude for the orange peel he had flambéed over the glass. He glanced upward, as though my hand had brushed against his shoulder. "You remembered as well," he remarked, a hint of pleasure in his voice. The evenings transformed into a cherished routine. I would request the sour and a petite bowl of the bar's almonds. He would insist on covering the cost of the nuts, and I would leave an excessive tip to make up for it. He would deliver a quip regarding the economy of generosity, though it carried a weight that transcended mere humor. At times he would slide a folded napkin my way, inscribed with a solitary word in delicate, precise script, "Moonlight, Magnolia, Mercy," almost as if he were christening the night. I tucked them away in my coat pocket, as though they were tangible evidence I could wield against the unfolding hours. Once my phone illuminated the bar with my husband's name displayed on the screen. I allowed it to hum away. Miles feigned a deep fascination with the gleam of a coupe glass, his attention unwavering until the screen dimmed once more. When I finally uttered the words, "Work call," he merely nodded, neither challenging my deception nor offering me an escape from it. "What draws you to bartending?" I inquired on a quieter evening, as the rain created a halo on the window and the hotel's guests had withdrawn to their rooms. He rapped the bar gently with his knuckles, lost in thought. "This is an excellent venue for honing the skills I'm striving to perfect," he remarked. "Listen closely. Timing. Understanding the moments to contribute and the times to step back. Beverages or individuals?" I admitted both, he confessed. "Primarily individuals." "What comes next?" I inquired. "What follows after you've honed your skills sufficiently?" He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "In Seattle, there exists a bar that offers a mentorship program. I have dispatched a reel. It's a long shot." He shrugged, nonchalant, like someone who understands the art of desire without demanding the universe in return. Should it occur, it will occur. The thought of his departure settled within me, a weight pressing against my chest like a tiny, unyielding stone. It was utterly absurd. A mysterious figure appeared, offering me a drink. Yet he had transformed into the serene moment of the day, when I rediscovered my essence. The mere idea of loss caused the room to shift ever so slightly, a subtlety I kept hidden. It was a Thursday when I arrived, burdened by a headache and the sharpness in my voice that arises from holding back words all afternoon. Miles cast a glance and exchanged the whiskey sour for a tall glass, its hue reminiscent of limes at twilight. "What is that?" I inquired. "Paloma, hold the tequila," he remarked. "A rim of salt. Aspirin masquerading as benevolence." It was a flavor of liberation. As I expressed my gratitude, he merely shook his head in response. "Remembering is an essential aspect of the role," he remarked. "Awareness is the pause." "Is that a formal address?" I inquired. "It's a promise," he declared, averting his gaze, as though the weight of promises was too heavy for direct confrontation. I began to gauge my weeks by the nights when I was free from the burden of justification. I left my rings on at the bar, not to signify anything, simply because Miles seldom cast a lingering glance their way. He gazed at my face, observing how my shoulders sagged just a bit lower midway through the glass. We established an unspoken agreement. He would refrain from inquiring about my life beyond those four walls. I would not delve into who lingered for him once the night drew to a close. The rule persisted until that fateful night when I returned later than expected, my eyes still burning from a heated argument that spiraled endlessly, leaving me disoriented. He refrained from grabbing a shaker. He placed a glass of water before me and meticulously folded a linen napkin, arranging it square and tidy beneath my hands like a runway awaiting arrival. "There's no need for words," he remarked. "Should you choose to share, I will be all ears. And if you decide against it, know that I will remain here, patiently awaiting your conclusion." I gazed into the depths of the water as though it held the secrets of a hidden map. As I finally raised my gaze, I found him meticulously crafting the sour, taking his time, allowing me the chance to reconsider. The egg white flowed gracefully, resembling silk within the tin. He lightly tapped the side with his ring finger, a familiar gesture I had observed whenever he sought to quell a tremor. He placed the completed glass on the surface, yet maintained his hand on the bar, close enough to evoke a sense of closeness without overstepping boundaries. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady, not for effect, but to match the atmosphere of the space. I held back my tears. Not at that moment. I took a sip and felt the stillness wash over me like a healing balm. As I departed, he accompanied me to the door, pausing by the coat stand to gently pull the sleeve resting on my shoulder. His hand moved with caution, detached in the manner that kindness often adopts to avoid surprising you. "Will I see you soon?" he inquired, framing it in a way that allowed me to respond negatively without causing any harm to our relationship. "Soon," I declared, infusing the word with a sincerity that surpassed my usual expressions that week. The cool night air brushed against my cheeks as I walked along the sidewalk. I came to the sudden realization that I had never shared my name with him. As I glanced over my shoulder, I found him gazing at me through the glass, his demeanor calm and patient, devoid of any haste. I eased the door open just a sliver and whispered it, a confession I was weary of holding back from the space that was already familiar with my preferred beverage. He uttered it again, as though fine-tuning his delivery. He smiled in a manner that brought to mind the napkins tucked away in my pocket. "Good night," he murmured, cradling my name gently as if it were a tender refuge for his words. As I strolled home, a realization dawned upon me about what had shifted. It was not the whiskey. It was not the bar. I had transformed. I was no longer a figure who ventured into the shadows to flee from existence. I was a person who moved through spaces where I was anticipated, and where that anticipation felt like a soft embrace rather than a burden. Little did I realize that a night would unfold when I would find myself burdened with tears too heavy to contain and a tempest too fierce to endure. I was aware that when the moment arrived, he would have the water prepared, followed by the drink, and then the door ajar should I require a breath of fresh air. For the time being, that was sufficient to draw me back again. By the third month, the bar had ceased to exist as a destination. A cadence had emerged. The sound of my heels echoed against the tile at the entrance. The weighty door closed with a resigned exhale, sealing off the world I was leaving behind. Miles raised his gaze before I had even placed my bag down, as though he had been anticipating my arrival, not merely hoping or guessing but truly expecting it. That was the perilous aspect, the manner in which he seemed to have already reserved a spot for me in his night, and not merely at the bar. He had begun to engage with the ritual. At times, he would hold off until I inquired about my whiskey sour. On other evenings, the drink would be poised for me, as though he could decipher the essence of my day etched upon my features. Once I endeavored to catch him off guard. "A gin martini tonight." He smirked leisurely as if savoring a triumph. "The glass is already chilling," he remarked, sliding it forward with precision. I ought to have felt a twinge of embarrassment at just how deeply that moved me. Yet, the reality was that I had never quite grown accustomed to the feeling of being awaited. Within the confines of my home, my existence unfolded as an endless catalogue of responsibilities I shouldered for the sake of others. With Miles, my needs were understood without a word spoken. He had already observed. On a Wednesday, the atmosphere buzzed with an unusual energy, as conference attendees occupied every available stool. I contemplated the idea of departure. Yet, as I remained by the threshold, his gaze met mine from across the space. He tapped the bar once, a quiet gesture, a signal meant solely for my eyes. And there, by some stroke of fortune, an unoccupied stool awaited in my corner. As I settled into my seat, he leaned in closer, his voice barely rising above the clamor around us. "You nearly fled," he remarked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just too crowded," I responded. He gave a single decisive shake of his head. "This isn't meant for you." He prepared my drink with a measured slowness that evening, as if each movement was a carefully crafted phrase he wished to savor. "Do you ever find yourself weary of others?" I inquired, my gaze fixed on the way the citrus twist sparkled in the light. "It's only those who fail to meet my gaze," he remarked. The word struck with a weight I hadn't intended. For an instant, it seemed as though he was not merely engaging in casual conversation, but rather addressing my very essence. As the crowd began to disperse, it dawned on me that I had stayed far longer than my usual departure time. Miles meticulously polished the glasses, the room alive with a gentle brass melody. My phone vibrated once more. My husband's name illuminated on the screen, a reminder I hadn't sought. Miles remained silent, yet there was a subtle shift in his jaw, as if he had spoken after all. "You seem rather subdued this evening," I remarked. He wiped his hands dry and placed the towel down gently. Then, maintaining a careful distance, he uttered the words, "Do you ever get the sense that you're leading two separate lives? The one you vowed to bring forth and the one that appears unexpectedly when your gaze wanders elsewhere?" My heartbeat faltered. I chose not to respond. I had no need to. The stillness that enveloped us spoke volumes of the reality we both understood. As I prepared to depart, he extended his hand toward my coat. Nothing extravagant, merely a simple act of politeness. His fingers grazed against mine as he passed it to me, neither lingering nor offering an apology, sufficient to make an impression. As I pivoted toward the door, his voice called out my name, not in the manner of a bartender tallying a tab, but rather like a man experimenting with a word he yearns to hold on to. It was the first moment I understood the fragile distance that had formed between us, how each evening seemed to inch closer to an unspoken truth that lingered in the air, unacknowledged yet palpable. I strolled home, the lingering flavor of whiskey and lemon dancing on my tongue, yet it was not the drink that left me feeling dizzy. I found myself yearning to return the very next day. The rain fell steadily that Friday. The rain descends in heavy torrents, drenching the city and compelling all to seek shelter, while the bar radiates warmth, a sanctuary amidst the storm. I had no intention of attending. I had vowed to myself that I wouldn't, at least not on that particular night. By 7, I found myself poised before the brass-handled door, my wet umbrella leaving a trail on the sidewalk, heart pounding as if I had just been caught in a forbidden act. Within the confines of the space, a serene hush enveloped the atmosphere, more subdued than one might typically expect. A handful of couples, a modest gathering of wanderers. The corner stool sat vacant, poised in anticipation, as though Miles had set it aside exclusively for my arrival. "You came," he remarked as I settled into the seat, and this time, his smile held a personal warmth. It was a sense of relief. "I nearly didn't," I confessed. "Almost." His gaze held on me just a moment longer than necessary. Without a word, he poured the whiskey sour. The glass settled before me, droplets of condensation appearing immediately. Our fingers grazed each other as I accepted it. A flicker of light. A boundary breach that could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. We conversed about the trivial and the profound. Melody. Classic films. He loathed Sundays for they seemed to stretch out like waiting rooms, each moment a reminder of the impending arrival of Monday. I discovered a laughter within me that had been absent for months, free, spontaneous, and genuine. The downpour intensified, drumming relentlessly against the glass panes. The phone vibrated softly against the countertop. The name of my husband. I allowed it to ring, remaining unbothered. Miles beheld. He remained silent, yet his gaze softened, as if he grasped more than he ought to have. As the clock struck closing time, the remaining patrons meandered into the tempest outside. Alone at the bar, I cradled the remnants of my drink, the final sip lingering in the glass. He meticulously cleaned the bar, his gaze fixed on me. "You may remain here until it eases," he murmured softly. "The rain doesn't bother me," I said, yet I remained where I was. "I don't either." The stillness lingered, resonating with the rumble of distant storms and the delicate chime of crystal. Then he emerged from behind the bar. He maintained a distance, yet it was just near enough for me to sense his warmth. You realize this has evolved beyond mere beverages, he remarked. His voice resonated with a calm steadiness, yet I could sense the underlying pulse within it. I ought to have responded with a measured reply, a response that felt secure. In a hushed tone I murmured, I know. His hand brushed against my wrist, a feather-light touch as it lingered on the bar. Neither aggressive nor assuming, merely a beckoning. My heart raced under his caress, revealing my secret. Lightning illuminated the glass windows with a brilliant flash. In that fleeting instant, the entire space shimmered with a silvery hue. In that fleeting moment of clarity, the truth revealed itself to me. This had transcended mere curiosity. It was a deep, gnawing hunger. As the thunder rumbled, his hand glided from my wrist down to my fingers. He didn't draw me closer, not just yet. Yet the question lingered in the air, suspended between us like the tempest raging beyond the window. I held on tightly. That was the night the boundaries finally faded. The night I understood that even if I stepped out into the downpour, I had already traversed a part of myself that could never be reclaimed. The rain persisted endlessly. The sun hammered the city with unyielding force, drowning out all sense of reason. Miles's hand rested in mine, his thumb drawing delicate circles against my skin, as if he were mapping out the words I hadn't found the courage to voice. You ought to leave, he whispered. His words conveyed a message, yet his body remained still. His gaze was fixed on me, unblinking, exposed. I understand, I murmured. Yet I remained still as well. The storm outside seemed to have encased us, reducing the universe to the soft glow of the bar, the mingling aromas of oak and citrus, and the charged distance between his lips and mine. He inched nearer, each movement measured and intentional, allowing me ample opportunity to retreat. Yet I refrained. As his lips met mine, gentle and hesitant, a part of me began to unravel. I had not fully grasped the depth of my yearning for tenderness, for the feeling of being desired. The kiss intensified, and in an instant, I found myself against the smooth surface of the bar, his hands firmly positioned on either side of me, while mine wove into the fabric of his shirt. For months I convinced myself that I possessed the strength to withstand temptation. At that instant I yearned to abandon my strength. I yearned to experience emotion. The rest faded into obscurity, his breath warm against my ear, my laughter spilling forth amidst tears I hadn't realized I was suppressing, the way his voice trembled as he whispered my name, treating it as if it were a rare treasure. As the tempest subsided, and the outside world shifted from a deep abyss to a muted gray, I found myself once more perched on that barstool, my fingers quaking as I slipped my coat back on. Silence enveloped us initially. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of our actions, laden with their significance. At last he remarked, "You don't owe me anything after this." Yet I hold no regrets. Our gazes locked. In that fleeting instant, he appeared simultaneously youthful and aged, like a soul who had just encountered a blend of peril and sanctity in a single breath. I might have chosen to deceive. I might have claimed it was an error. Yet I chose not to. I merely murmured, "Neither do I." As I emerged onto the damp pavement, the crisp morning air brushed against my heated skin. The air was infused with the scent of rain and the promise of new beginnings. As the door closed gently behind me, I was struck by two undeniable truths. That night would forever linger in my memory. Despite my best efforts to conceal it, a fragment of my being would eternally gravitate back to that bar, to the boy who recalled my drink, and to the woman I transformed into when I allowed him to see me.